and welcome to episode 925 of the Player One podcast for Tuesday, August 20th, 2024. I'm your host, Chris Johnston. As you can see, if you're watching the YouTube version of this or on Twitch, I'm once again by myself. Greg and Phil are off doing their own things. They are going to be uh, gone until next week. We'll have at least one of them back, and then we'll do a regular show. But for this episode, I'm going to share another audio file from the archive with you. So last week, if you listened to that episode, you may have heard the audio of Sega's E3 1999 press conference. That's the one where they introduced everything about the US launch of the Dreamcast for $99.99, which, the 25th anniversary of that is coming up here real fast. And I mentioned that I had another tape along with that one that I digitized. And this one is labeled Miyamoto Q&A. Now, unfortunately, I taped over it. So what was at one time a Shigeru Miyamoto Q&A is no longer that, and that was a sort of roundtable discussion at E3 1998, and the audio quality on it, even though I only have half of it, is very bad. You can't really hear much of anything, so I'm not going to share that with you. But what I am going to share with you is what I taped over the Miyamoto Q&A for, which is an interview with David Crane. And if you recognize that name, maybe you're a retro gamer. He was the programmer creator of Pitfall for the Atari 2600, Freeway for the Atari 2600, and A Boy and His Blob for the Nintendo Entertainment System, among many other games. And I contacted David for a Whatever Happened To story in EGM's news section. I had done a couple of these. I did a Whatever Happened To Color Dreams. Spoiler alert, they turned into sort of religious Christian game making company. And in addition to Color Dreams, I did one on Toe Jam and Earl. So what the creators of that game were doing, Greg Johnson and Mark Vorsanger. And then I also reached out to David Crane. Actually, I had to find David Crane's contact info from a number of other people. So I kind of bounced around, contacted Gary Kitchen, who also worked at Activision during the same time as David, and got in touch with him and did this phone interview. So just to kind of put us in a place in time, this was for the November 1998 issue of EGM. That's the issue it appears in, and it's only like a half page. It's not really much of a story. And then I guess put the entire transcript of the interview up on videogames.com. I don't think it's on the internet anymore. But to kind of talk about the time period, so in the late 90s, Gary Kitchen and David Crane were running Skyworks Technologies, and this is a company that made adver games, and most notably the Shockwave games that appeared on candystand.com. So this was a Lifesavers branded game portal, and really the first adver game portal on the internet, and they made Shockwave games for the web. So and it's interesting because at that time, not a whole lot of people had cable modems. High-speed internet wasn't really a thing. People, at least I had at home a 56K modem. You had people with 28.8K modems, and gaming on the internet wasn't really a thing yet. This is, Shockwave, which is sort of the precursor to things like Flash and Unity, and now we have HTML5 and all the ways you can play games on the web. In a web browser now, but back then you didn't really have that. Shockwave was really the first of its kind there, and so Gary Kitchen and David Crane were making games for Candy Stand, And it was pretty interesting because there are parallels between working on a system like the Atari 2600, which had, very small memory size, and you couldn't do a lot with the display of graphics. And they're once again working with the limitations of the internet, limitations of internet speed and browsers and Shockwave itself. And just a very kind of interesting story. Now we have games on cell phones, and you can play games in web browsers, and we cloud stream games. Like it's a totally different world now. But playing games on the internet was um, a pretty new thing back in 1998. So anyway, we're going to talk with David Crane. You'll hear this interview from 26 years ago, and hopefully it'll be interesting, kind of a moment in time. And it's funny that it was retro at the time to talk with the creator of Pitfall, but even more so now, so many years later. And yeah, I'm going to roll the tape. Enjoy it, and I will see you in about half an hour and wrap up the show. So here you go.
Thanks for getting back to me. And I did have a couple questions for you, if you wouldn't mind answering.
Shoot.
All right. First of all, if you would explain your role at Skyworks Technologies and what you do.
Well, Gary explained to you what we do, right?
Yes.
Okay. Technically, I'm the Chief Technology Officer. And Gary and I are partners. We started the company together, and we have worked together 3 times now.
Mm-hmm.
I started Activision, and Gary was one of the first designers that we added to the core group that started the company. That was one of the hardest things we had to do in the first place was, we had guys who worked together well, and we were doing real high-quality product, but then we had to grow a little bit. So how do you do that? And we found Gary and some people that worked with him on the East Coast, in spite of the fact that we were in California, and set them up as their own office. So, I've been working with Gary since then, which was like 1983, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then he left Activision, started Absolute, and then later when Activision was sold, I left Activision and started working with him again.
Mm-hmm.
Then in '95, he and I decided we'd take advantage of the new revolution, the internet, as a video gaming platform,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where Skyworks came from. So, in essence, because most of the people are out of New Jersey, he is saddled with the business operations of the company, and I'm still out here in California. I have a one-man office out in Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do mostly out here is write the game code for the entertainment stuff that we do on our websites. Philosophically, as Gary filled you in, we do very large Fortune 100 company websites,
Mm-hmm.
and for those companies who realize that you can't just put a website up and say, please come and visit me. You have to give people a reason to visit, and you have to give them a reason to come back. And basically, all people do on the internet, in my opinion anyway, is play.
Mm-hmm.
There are some work functions that you can use the internet for, but in general, it's information and it's entertainment content.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we do. Is we design very attractive website HTML type content, and then sprinkle in branded video games so that our corporate sponsor, who happens to be paying for the website, gets his branded message across to the people who play. As far as the user is concerned, he has the benefit of, for free, getting video games of a quality he would otherwise have to pay for.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference between making a video game for like 2600 or the NES and one not for play on the internet?
Well, interestingly enough, there are a lot more similarities to gaming on the internet, or between gaming on the internet and gaming on those older consoles that you described, than there are similarities between gaming on the internet and gaming on the current consoles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, Gary and I both really enjoyed the early days, the 2600 and the 8-bit machines, because to do something that was truly attractive, truly fun, basically a good gaming experience on an extremely limited piece of hardware was the greatest challenge there was. If you go back to the 2600, it really only had 2 objects you could put on the screen, and if you worked real hard, you could put them on the screen more than one place. And, making something that was, truly interesting and fun with those kind of limitations was a real challenge, and an enjoyable challenge, really. The video game business over the years then evolved into, 15 and 20 man projects and $2 million budgets and 600 megabytes on a CD, and basically even till today, where the machines like the PlayStation or the N64 can basically render a 3-dimensional world in real time. So it's like the hardware is capable of so much. A lot of the challenge is gone in creating an interesting experience on a simple machine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then along come the internet, and whereas the computer that you're operating it on is, in many cases, nearly as powerful as those console machines, you are extremely bandwidth limited. So you're dealing with much smaller files than you can with any current console. So a lot of the techniques that we developed over the years to provide a real fun experience with very few bytes has come in very handy on doing the stuff on the internet. I mean, you'll find shockwave games out there that are 2 and 3 megabytes long that when you wait an hour and a half for it to download on a 28 modem, you find, all you get to do is like throw a dart or something. And there are a lot of very, very large products out there with very low play value. And what we pride ourselves in is, our downloads are, 3, 4, 5, 600 kbytes, but it's well worth the wait. And what you're getting for that, the average person can't even tell it from a 600 megabyte CD game.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the similarities, basically. All the techniques that we developed in making things really interesting and really cool with very little media comes in handy, because the media is the thing that increases your file size and download time.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of Pitfall 3D, the Activision update of your original 2600 game?
Oh, I don't really have an opinion one way or the other.
Have you seen it? Have you played it?
I believe I saw it at the last trade show, although there have been so many. I mean, there have been a number of Pitfall products since then.
Yeah.
But thinking back, I did see it at a trade show. The one thing I'm not able to do is play games at a trade show. I mean, basically, to get to any level of skill in a game takes, 20 to 50 hours, or else the designer's not doing his job. And so I see these at a trade show, and I have 5 minutes to see them. But, really, it's Activision's franchise, and they can and should use the name Pitfall for whatever product they do. But, Pitfall was kind of a phenomenon back in its day because it was the first run, jump, and climb style game on the 2600.
Mm-hmm.
And, spawned a genre of about 650 other cartridges.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Still going today.
Yeah. Yeah, I assume you followed, since you're doing a retrospective piece of some kind, right?
Yes.
So you do your searches on the internet and find the various 2600 groups and groupies and
Oh, definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, a couple years ago I was big into retro and followed all that for a long time. So it's come back with all the classic packs that Namco's putting out and Midway's putting out and Activision's putting out soon.
Mhm.
So it's really kind of coming back as people who are 25, 30, 35 get PlayStations and want to play some of those old games again.
Well, I mean, what happened to the video game business again is the systems got more and more capable, and so people began to say, "Well, gee, I can do 700 rooms in my adventure game, and all in full color, full screen pictures, and I can do all these things. Therefore, I will."
Mm-hmm.
And yet, you find that 650 megabytes of a game is not necessarily any more fun than 4K bytes of a 2600 game.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that comes in. What comes into play there is how much tweaking you're able to put into it, and the details, and not the graphics and not the sound effects. Although those things are nice, and in our current work today, because the machines are capable of doing them, we use them a lot. I mean, I'm really proud of our use of sound effects in some of these games. You should go to the Slapshot Shootout on the candy stand, and while you're playing that, bear in mind that there's only a single channel of audio operating at the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's techniques and tricks that make the experience richer than it would otherwise be.
Mm-hmm. Do you play or follow the video game industry today still?
Only on the periphery, to the extent that I find out what's the hot game and talk to people who have played it and look at it. Basically, the internet gaming business runs on such deadlines that we don't have a lot of time to play other products.
Yeah. What's your favorite video game that's out now for the current systems? What really has impressed you?
Oh, I really make it a point not to try to decide that. I mean, people have asked me for 20 some odd years now, what's your favorite game? And
yeah.
Well, the stock answer to that is still true. Is my favorite game has to be the game that I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it wasn't my favorite, why would I spend 16 hours a day in a chair?
Yeah.
In front of it. And so, for me, there's a lot greater thrill to designing a game than playing it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm creating something, and I'm creating something special, and I'm enjoying what I'm creating. I'll complete a particularly difficult mathematical task or whatever the case may be, and truly get some positive feedback from it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, boy, when I see it on the screen, I really did something. So I get a lot more enjoyment out of the designing process than actually sitting down and playing, particularly since, like I said, to get good at any particular game, you've got to be able to devote 20 hours to it.
Yeah. What's your favorite game out of the ones that you worked on that you can look back and say, wow, that was definitely one of the best?
That's really tough, too, because every one of them had something cool.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to remember, in the days of the 2600, there were never more than 100 people in the world who had the slightest inkling of what we were doing from a technical standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would spend a week working till midnight to do some little thing to make the 2600 do one more thing that its designer never intended.
Mm-hmm.
And the average player picks it up and says, "Oh, cool! There's a chicken on the screen or whatever," and just the entire display of the freeway display, for example, was a technical achievement that was unparalleled to date at that point,
mm-hmm.
and only recognized for what it is by a small handful of people.
Hmm.
So, like I said, every game that I did had something like that. And so I could spend hours going through each game and saying, oh, and here's something that, no game had ever done this before, and it was really cool, and that's my recollection of it. That's the reason it's my favorite, is because it does this, But, if I were to give you a favorite, it would be because of some technical trick that nobody alive even anymore would realize.
All right, well, what, in your opinion, makes a video game fun? What elements does a fun game have?
Yeah, well, there's a good stock answer for that, which is, if I knew that, it wouldn't be so hard every time. Basically, you start out with a basic concept, and it has to have, a compelling goal. It has to have interesting things to do on your way to the goal. In most cases, it has to have some form of a threat, whether it's a threat, a real threat, an adventure game, or just in a driving game running into the wall. There's some threat so that it's something you don't want to do. I'll tell you as an aside right now, one thing that often happens in the video game business, I won't say it's a mistake, but it happens very often, is people are putting special effects in for things like explosions and collisions and that sort of thing, and quite often the coolest thing you can do in the game is lose. We try to avoid that sort of thing. We try to make it so that the experiences that you want to achieve are more desirable than the experiences that you don't want to achieve. But even at that, it's kind of nice to go down in flames in a very spectacular way. So in any case, you have to have compelling reason to be playing, and some threat that makes it more difficult to play. And so you just start out with some basic elements, and where you go from there is entirely up to the design process. It doesn't happen at the beginning, it happens at the end. Once you do get every element in place and everything really works, the nuts and bolts part of the whole process. I mean, when you start out with an empty file, you don't have gravity, you don't have collision, you don't have this, that. You basically have to make all of the objects interact and with each other and with the backgrounds, and you get everything actually running, and so now you've got kind of a little universe that you've created where these things operate in a certain way. And at that point, you start fiddling with it to make things more interesting, more fun, more challenging. You're tweaking how hard things are. It was once said, I think, Rob Fulop's quote. You know Rob Fulop?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, he says, you want me to make it hard? I'll make it hard. He said, you enter a room and a wise old man sits there and it says, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 1 million. Making a game hard is not necessarily a good thing. Making it challenging is what you're trying to achieve, which means it's attainable and yet still difficult enough that it's a real challenge to achieve.
All right, well, those were all the questions that I had. Was there anything that you would want to add just of interest to gamers today from what you're doing now?
Well, I don't know. I suppose I can be tout what we're doing, but you've been to the candy stand?
Yes, I have.
You haven't been there 14 hours, or you haven't played all the games.
No, no, I haven't.
There's a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah, there are quite a few games.
Don't overlook any one of them because any one of them might be the one that's your favorite. Even some of the cute little ones. Like, we had an Easter egg collection once that actually turned out to be a real addictive little Pac-Man-like game, and things like that. Again, the game doesn't have to be a Ben-Hur to actually be really enjoyable.
Yeah.
But we're basically doing more than state-of-the-art Shockwave games. I don't know if you noticed. Did you see our pool game, for example?
Yeah, isn't that the new one? Or
I think that's been up for a number of months.
Okay.
But it's a full billiards game, and there was some guy in the industry who had done some Shockwave work and therefore was being considered to be the expert on Shockwave games, and and he had a newsletter on that sort of thing. And then our game started coming out, and he ran out of expletives. I mean, he basically was comparing our work to, these little games where you're, I don't know, trying to line up 3 things and win a prize, or whatever. And, he was just astounded that running in Shockwave, we could do a complete, full real-time pool game with all the math involved and just all the various different games. I go back to them and still play them for fun.
Yeah, I haven't really seen any other games over the web or Shockwave that are quite as complex or video game-like, really. So.
Yeah, well, that's not a small thing that you just said.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, that's what we're proud of, is we are, absolutely the best in the world at what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And the products show it.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, thank you very much for answering a couple of questions for me.
Well, I'm glad you hounded Gary, and then he turned around and hounded me, because I had every intention of getting back to you, but like I said, I had a hard disk crash, and it couldn't have been a worse disk to crash. It was the C drive on my NT server that, the backbone that connects the entire office together.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand what happened, what's involved when that happens. I've had that happen to me several times.
Yep.
So, but definitely, thanks for getting back to me. It took me a long time to search you down, actually, because a lot of places on the internet, even the retro sites, had no idea, how to find contact information for you. So,
yeah, there's
Activision themselves actually didn't know.
Well, there are people within Activision who I've corresponded with who've asked me questions about, the compilations that they're doing, whatever they call those action packs. Yeah.
The classics collections. Or 30-game collections.
They've called. In fact, they've gotten written authorization from me to do some of this stuff, but.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends who you reach at Activision. That would be hard to find those particular product managers who happen to know where I am.
Yeah.
But there's a 2600 documentary piece being worked on. Are you familiar with that one?
Is that one by Glenn Saunders?
That's the one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've got information, connect with Glenn Saunders. He would be happy to give you other information on the piece that you're doing right now.
Yeah.
And also anything that he can do that he's trying to find funding for this particular documentary. But, I mean, he's got 15 hours of videotapes of, all of us that were involved in those early days and doing talking head interviews and roundtable forums and all sorts of things on videotape.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I had contacted him to see if he knew where you were, and hopefully I can connect him with ZDTV, which is a new cable network by the publishing company that I work for.
Uh-huh.
It'd be great to get that kind of stuff, on TV or somewhere where a lot of gamers can see it today, even.
Yeah.
Because there is interest in the early days, especially now.
Well, like I said, the games are a lot bigger, but that doesn't mean they're any more fun these days.
That's true. I've seen a lot of games that are flashy and have a lot of great graphics, but they're just not good games.
Yep.
So it's really sad.
I worked with Nolan Bushnell at Atari, and then when he was kind of pushed out and the big suits came from Warner Brothers and didn't really know what they were doing, that's when we founded Activision, left Atari. And when we left Atari, there were 4 of us, and it turns out that the 4 of us at Atari were responsible for 60% of Atari's revenues in the previous year because of cartridge sales. And that wasn't an insignificant figure. Their total sales that year were $100 million. So 4 of us worth about $60 million worth of annual sales starting a company, you're likely going to be able to succeed. And so, we did, and Activision was a great success story. I mean, it was, until Compaq, it was the fastest growing startup in America, in the history of business startups. Then Compaq came along and actually grew bigger faster. But Compaq, on the other hand, did it by ripping off IBM, by creating a clone. We did it by supporting the Atari platform with third-party software. So we had sort of moral high ground. But anyway, everybody looked at that and said, geez, what success. All it was is just four guys from, 4 computer geeks or whatever, start a company and look at all that success. And, the trade shows back then were the Consumer Electronics Show, and they were every 6 months. And in the period between one show and another, there were 32 companies started to do Atari 2600 software cartridges. And that's because everybody looked at Activision and said, look how easy it is. Well, it isn't all that easy. And unfortunately, each one of those companies that started with a couple $1 million of seed capital. And the first thing they did was designed a game. And then the next thing they did was built a couple 100,000 of them with their $2 million. And so they all hit the market 6 months later. And that's when all the garbage showed up. And, that was the death of the video game business. That was the death of that cycle. And we didn't really see it coming. We should have seen it coming, because I myself said, I look at these companies and I said, not one of these is going to be in business a year from now. And it was true. Not one of them was in business a year from then. And what we didn't realize was what impact that would have on the business.
Yeah.
Because all 200,000 of those cartridges that were sitting in a warehouse ended up getting shipped to stores. In many cases, I don't know if you remember this period, but there was a time when you could either go into the store with your $30 and you could buy Activision's latest release, a real cool game, or there was this bin in the front of the store where cartridges were $5 a piece. So for your $30, you could buy one game that you know is going to be good, or 6 games that maybe one of them you'll like, And so Dad, spending his Christmas dollars on the kid, instead of buying the game that the kid asked for, bought him 6 games, and was a real hero for a short period of time. But as a result, you basically couldn't sell a $30 cartridge for 2 years, because there were 20 million cartridges out there that nobody wanted, sitting on store shelves. And why retailers carried them. They bought them for $3 and sold them for $5, which is a bigger markup than they were getting on a full-price cartridge. So the retailers carried them, and there's nothing we could do about that. They thought it was a good deal. So anyway, all that happened. But in any case, the people looking at Activision's success caused them to start these companies, and that's where a lot of the garbage software came from back then. Nowadays, it's like you say, it's a lot of flash, and there are people who fancy themselves to be game designers when really what they are is graphic designers, and they do beautiful graphic games, and then people say, well, it's not fun. I don't want to go do that. I don't feel compelled to go and try to win this game or whatever, and that's just lack of game design.
Do you think the market could crash like it did in 83, 84 with today's systems and games?
Well, remember, I described how the crash basically occurred.
Yeah.
It was a glut in one short period of time of people trying to get into the video game business, and make a killing. And as a result, they generated all this garbage, and it ended up on the market and killed the frontline product sales. That specific problem can't really happen.
Yeah.
Largely because the console game companies don't let you do games for their system unless you're licensed. And so they control the flow of companies through the licensing process. On the other hand, you see it in the PC. I mean, PC gaming is such that there are, 4,000 games out there right now for the PC? And so, in that case, it's certainly flooded in a similar fashion. However, because it's flooded, you don't see a lot of new companies starting up to do PC gaming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the venture capitalists are a little smarter. They say, well, you know, this is not a good business to get into. So, you know, it's much more mature and therefore not going to have the same kind of a flash-in-the-pan problem.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that with Sony having so much success with the PlayStation that might encourage other consumer electronics companies like Philips or Panasonic, those types of companies, to try to get into video games?
Well,
and kind of create a system glut or a hardware glut?
Well, there will never be a hardware glut.
Mm-hmm.
It takes too long to develop a piece of hardware, and, you know, it's too much effort to get a lot of software developers behind it for there to be, you know, more than 3 or 4 systems in the market at any one given time.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is the business is healthier and generally more successful when there are 3 or 4, well, 3 is a good number,
Mm-hmm.
systems competing in the market. It's not good to have just one system.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't happen to have 5 or 6, you know, truly big competitive systems.
Yeah.
But if you've got 3, you're doing really well. Now, right now, if you count the PC as a platform, you've got 3,
Mm-hmm.
you know, of the biggies. And, you know, I don't think Sega's a player at this point anymore, and, you know, 3DO's gone. And so basically you're just talking about the big 2 consoles plus PCs.
Mm-hmm.
That's a healthy way to be. You've got enough people going to be developing games cross-platform, and so the hardware manufacturers fight it out to find out who's going to get the best market share. But as far as the software developers are concerned, all you do is you do your product for the, you know, the most available system,
Mm-hmm.
and the second most available system, and sometimes the third. So it's a healthy industry. It's not one that you basically have to worry about too much, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, and that is our show for this week. Thank you very much for listening. If you have a question for us or would like to comment on something you heard, you can direct that to @P1Podcast on the Twitter or any other social media site, Blue Sky, Threads, definitely X. And let's see, what else do I say? We also have a website, player1podcast.com. There you'll find our contact information. You'll find blog entries about Sega CD stuff from Mr. Greg Seward. You will also find Generation 16 episodes as they happen. His video on Ridge Racer, not necessarily having to do with the Sega Genesis, but an interesting video that you should definitely check out. So you'll find Generation 16 episodes on our website as well. And you'll find show notes and links to all the things that we talked about in this episode. Well, since this is a special episode, I'll include links to stuff about David Crane, Gary Kitchen, and Skyworks Technologies, Candy Stand, etc. And hope you check that stuff out. And also on our website, in the show notes, is a link to our Discord server where you can discuss this episode with us and our other listeners. If you would like to subscribe to the Player One Podcast, you can do so at player1podcast.com or any podcast client that you happen to use, whatever you use to listen to podcasts. Maybe that's Pocket Casts, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Castro, whatever Spotify client you might use. Please consider subscribing to the podcast and giving us a rating or review. And let's see, if you have a few dollars that you want to support the show with, you can do so at patreon.com/P1podcast. Throw a few shekels our way. It keeps the show going, keeps us streaming, keeps us doing all the things that bring this show to you. And if you are a supporter of the $5 tier, cheap, you get an after show every single week, and we crack wise, do all the things we can't do on the regular show, sometimes play games there as well. What are we doing this week? Well, I'm going to do a mini episode of the podcast with my daughter as co-host. So stay tuned for that if you are a patron of the show. I think it'll be fun. We haven't recorded it yet, so I don't actually know. Hopefully it'll be good. Let's see. Oh, and if you want to support Greg Seward and all of his video ventures, you can do so at patreon.com/Greg Seward. He does a lot of great stuff there, including the weekly commute, which, yeah, he talks about Phil and me and all the things that he can't talk about on this show or in Generation 16. All right. I think that is it for this week. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully everybody out there in Radioland is safe and well. Hope your family, friends, loved ones are safe and well as well. And we will talk at you again next week. Bye-bye.